We're going to move swiftly on to Carys Watts. So Carys is at the University of Newcastle and is the current Higher Education Bioscience Teacher of the Year. She gave a fantastic talk at BioSummit, so thought it fitted in really nicely with some of the work that Hannah's been talking about, especially around engaging with students. So Carys, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to give the talk today. I really appreciate it. I'm learning to become a little more confident in my teaching the older I get. So this is the first year that I've applied for the HE Bioscience Teacher of the Year award. So I was absolutely thrilled when I won it. I didn't expect it at all. If you've never considered applying, I would definitely recommend applying. It's a great experience for really consolidating your pedagogy and understanding where you're going and what your students can benefit from. So my talk is about reframing failure as a learning opportunity, confidence through progressive reinforcement. And I've tried to make the talk different to ones I've given in the past. Some of the content is similar, but hopefully there's enough in there to keep your attention. So firstly, a little bit about me. I was a microbiologist before I moved across to teaching and scholarship. When I was doing my postdoc, I became hesitant. I saw some of the darker side, shall we say, of academia and research, and I didn't feel comfortable thinking I would stay in a research track. So when the opportunity came up to become a teaching and scholarship lecturer, I leapt at it. I had taken some evening classes in management, a certificate and a diploma, and they served me really well in moving into the area of enterprise that I work in now. I'm also at the university. I co-lead the single parents community here with a charity called Gingerbread. If anyone wants to find out about that, do contact me afterwards. It's a really great network to be a part of. So I suppose, why would I want to admit failure and why would I want to encourage failure in my students? I think it's really important that we are accessible role models to our students, that we are not on a pedestal, that they feel they can understand where we came from and that we were in their shoes once. It levels the playing field for them. And I have never been comfortable being the sage on the stage. I've always wanted interaction with my students when I'm teaching, to see that level of engagement, to know that they are wanting to learn and are keen to learn. But also, it's a really important life lesson that life is tough and none of us have got to where we are today on a linear path. There have been deviations, there have been things that have gone wrong. So we need to be honest about that with our students so that they can see that they can achieve things and that it's not just a straight line from A to B. So why me and why failure? I am slowly getting over my imposter syndrome. It's very real. I know people don't agree with calling it syndrome. I think there is definitely imposter in there. Not feeling confident in your own abilities, seeing the people who've excelled and not seeing their backstory can actually increase that imposter syndrome feeling. I think as scientists, that we know through the scientific process that things aren't necessarily going to work. We propose hypotheses and we see what happens. We think we know what's going to happen, but then something may go completely wrong. And what do? We change things ever so slightly. We tweak things, we go back, we take some steps again. So we do this in a scientific context anyway. So why do we not apply that into other areas of our life? I believe there's a lot that can be learned from failing, and it was really lovely to hear Hannah's talk about getting the students to work together and really think about what they're doing and using different concepts in different ways, and that collaboration, because they learn a lot more by seeing how other people do things than us telling them how to do it. It's a little bit like watching Jamie Oliver make something and it looks so simple, but then getting actually into the kitchen and making it yourself, it's chaos and it takes you 10 times as long. I also think that there is a lot of aspects to being psychosocially ready to fail. So if we think about where our students are, they come in potentially with very high grades. We are encouraging them to learn very quickly, a different style of learning, a different environment that they've never been in before. And Erickson has concepts which look at different ages of people and actually what they value in life and the way that they approach things. So when you are a baby, you literally will chew on anything to see if it's edible and to understand its meaning in the world. We then go through a phase where we are finding our kin, we are finding out what we like and do not like, understanding power dynamics. We then, as we go older, we rely more on finding that intimacy and isolation. And that is where our learners are, certainly from the age bracket of about 18 to 25. They tend to be trying to find their way in the world and try to find their people and how they fit and what they are comfortable with. As you get older into my stage of life, this is called the generativity versus stagnation phase, which can be a little bit doom and gloom. But what that actually means is that this is where we're willing to try things. We are willing to look at things in a different lens. We also want to give back to society a bit more. So we're more in service now. Things are less about us and it's more about other people. I'm not quite at the integrity versus despair stage yet, and I hope to not be there for a long time. But understanding that actually where we sit as educators and where our students sit helps us to understand why perhaps they might not be engaging, or perhaps the messages that we're giving them aren't landing. So why would I encourage failure? As I mentioned, we've got some high achievers. They have high risk ahead of them. So there's cost, there's debt, there's external pressures. If they are first generation, widening participation. If they've got protected characteristics or ED&I, then they may be finding themselves in a very unusual place, and they can go from being a big fish in a small pond in a particular learning environment to dropping them into this huge, quite scary environment where they're just a small fish and they may not be the highest on the rank as they may have been previously. So it's a whole new set of rules that are coming in. And one of the things that I've noticed is that students can tend to come in with what we call a fixed mindset. So they think there is a traditional way of doing things. It's worked for them in the past. They're going to do that again when they get to university. And then they suddenly realise that actually cramming for an exam at the last minute doesn't work. And we're expecting different things of them. So it's this shifting goalposts and thinking that they're not in Kansas anymore. It's very much, it's changed. It's a new environment. So what I wanted to do was reframe this, and the image that I've shown on the right here, this is a picture of a yew tree with yew berries, and they're very poisonous. If you think back to the slide where we had the Erickson rainbow, as you grow older, what we see is that when toddlers are growing up, when they're very tiny, you can feed them anything and they will try it, but when they get to a certain age and all of a sudden they just stop eating certain things. And apparently that's an evolutionary development, that it protects them because they won't just go and grab berries off a bush, because the potential is that those berries are poisonous. Our students potentially are in that same situation. Why would they want to expose themselves to a risk that could potentially be damaging? If you think of it from a clan or community perspective, if you do something that puts you outside of the clan or community, you're then at risk. You're leaving yourself out to at risk to the elements, at risk to being attacked by wild creatures, for example. So putting ourselves out there from an evolutionary perspective is quite dangerous, but it is highly valuable for us to succeed. If you eat a poisonous berry once and it doesn't kill you, you'll know not to do that again, for example. One of my colleagues that I've worked with in the past is Heidi Neck over in Babson College in Massachusetts, and she's got a great view of the world. If anything goes wrong, she immediately counters that with, oh, how wonderful. So, for example, how wonderful, my bus was late this morning, so I got to talk to more people at the bus stop. You immediately flip it on its head rather than it being a doom and gloom and taking that with you for the rest of the day. So remembering that although something has gone wrong, trying to find something good from it, I find has been really helpful. Also, when we think about success and failure, success can mean that you plateau. You can enter a comfort zone. So if a student has achieved, say, a first class or a 2-1 in an assignment, that next assignment, they assume, okay, well, I did well in the last one, so I'm going to apply the same amount of effort and the same experience as I will to the next one. It may not be that simple, though. They may have missed the mark. They may not have done enough work. They may not have concentrated or revised or researched and in the manner that's required for the next assignment. So although we learn from success, we don't learn as much from it. And one of my colleagues has been working on a project around feedback and noted that students that get the higher marks may or may not look at their feedback, and the lower marks students tend to avoid it altogether. So that's really interesting from that perspective, that they're not willing to engage with what's gone wrong and how they could improve from it. So where I'm trying to get the students to move from is more into a design thinking phase, and to get them to rapidly test something, and if it doesn't work, to take those steps back and try something again. So very similar to doing mobile updates, it's a series of improvements. You're not the finished article, you're going to keep improving. So how do I go about this? So I've been trying to get my pedagogy down on paper in the last 12 to 18 months. And one of the things that I've been working on is this idea of having progressive confidence. And I use what's called a progressive coaching technique. And I was fortunate to get this published in an advanced HE guide earlier on this year. And what I've been hoping to do is to build this idea of nurturing students. So getting them to put a little bit of themselves out there, get some feedback, and then grow from that and develop it. So this isn't a one-shot essay, for example. You do a piece of work which then builds and then grows into something else. And it allows people to develop trust. And what I'm hoping to do is to get the students to share their work with others, to put themselves out there a little bit. And it allows them to then think about that as a scientific process as well. So if we think about students at stage 1, they may not be in the position to be able to design a practical set of experiments. They are very much reliant on following a recipe. What we need to do is get them to become more confident in trial and error and learning from those mistakes and improving it. One of the areas that I've really realised recently is hone in on what they actually do. So if we think about a lot of our young learners, very technologically savvy, very used to Instagram, very used to TikTok, ask them how many times they would record something before they actually post it online, or how many times they take a photograph before they post it online. You're applying those innate behaviours of you don't just do it once, you repeat it until you get it right. So apply that into your academic work, and then hopefully that will see an improvement. So where does this actually come from? Well, I was fortunate enough to have some training in something that's called motivational interviewing, which was a technique developed for working with prisoners who are suffering from addiction. So we've got a closed environment where individuals are set on a certain path and they are using substances to cope in that environment. And what motivational interviewing does is it positions the individual on the outcomes if they continue with a series of activities versus what would happen if. So if you continued on your path of X, Y, Z, this is where you would be in 6 to 18 months' time. Or if you modified your behaviour, your goal could be in 6 to 8 weeks' time this, and this is what life could look like. And by constantly checking in on people and seeing how this is going, what we see is this progressive improvement and change, and things become more accessible. Again, what we're doing is we're saying not that you have to immediately stop and your life will get better, but actually over a series of time, things can improve. So by having these regular interactions and actionable tasks, this can change behaviours for the better, which then also flips the mindset from being a fixed mindset into a growth mindset and changes those negative behaviours. And it's an incremental change that we see over time. So I've been using this with my students in a progressive coaching capacity, and it allows a nurture to happen. Students become more confident, they're more willing to open up, they see the benefits of doing these actions. And quite relevant that we've got Hannah from Cardiff here. I've put my little dragon in here. I run a business enterprise for the bioscientist module, and our last session that the students get feedback on is a high-risk session with our dragons at the end where they do pitching. Prior to that, though, we have an expert coaching session, which is very much a kind of speed dating your idea with academics and external experts. The students literally produce an A4 sheet with their ideas on it, and they talk through this with the experts. But prior to getting to that stage, we start off with sharing with peers initially. So they get that very gentle early feedback, and then we increase that risk. So we have sharing with other groups and facilitators, and then we move up to this pitching to the dragons as the last time. So we can see that the students over time become more confident in what they're saying. They become more fluent in their messaging as well. They also roll with things that are happening. So if they get feedback that ask them a question they can't answer, it forces them into the position to question, well, why did I come to that assumption in the first place? And what do I need to do to find out the information that's missing? So what does this look like? I am a visual learner, so I decided I would stick a few little diagrams in here. Very early on, we've got low risk. So talking to your peers should be a low risk situation. There's no marks associated with it. There's no written feedback. It's constructive, it's surface information, and it's contextual. If we think about the level of feedback that students give each other, it tends to be quite general. It tends to be quite basic. They don't like to offend each other, which is great. We encourage them to be constructive and to think about, how would you want to hear this? If I was to say this to you, how would that sound? And if they wouldn't say it and want to hear it themselves, they're not supposed to say that to someone else. So it really makes them think twice about how they're going to behave and interact together. We've then got the mid-level, our medium risk, where our facilitators are involved. The aim here is to get the students to convergently think. So at the start of my module, they've got lots of great ideas, which is fantastic. They then have to converge those ideas down to one idea and really focus on what they're going to do. So how are they going to develop through the rest of the module, work as a team, and this starts that coaching process to get them to that final goal. We've then got the late stage, which is our summative outputs. So they are pitching to their peers and they're pitching to staff. And the way that I do this is I use a crowdfunding video approach, recognizing that students are assessed in a live presentation capacity elsewhere in their final year of studies. So I would much rather they tell me everything that they know rather than only what they can remember. So this also builds on their digital capabilities as well. They have to decide how they're going to make that video, what format they're going to use. And when they are then going off to interviews, they can talk about how they've collaborated using Microsoft Teams and they've managed to produce a video. And that's portable, so they can take it with them if they want to, and they can show that as an element of the outputs they've had. And how does this add value? So in a pre-university context, failing is non-negotiable. Failing means that you're not going to make it to university. So this is a very difficult position. We are trying to encourage students to feel what failure is like, but also say, oh, you're not allowed to fail until you're with us. So that is quite difficult, and the connotations around failure can be very negative. So where I'm trying to get to is to get the students to fail formatively when it is low risk, learn from that very quickly and apply that learning into their assessments. And I use storytelling along the way to hopefully make this journey to success. This helps them then to engage with that feedback better, and it becomes an employability asset in the long run. One paper that I'm especially keen on is Lynn Siegler et al. They produced something called Even Einstein Struggled, where they looked at high school students and they told the stories of scientists. One was just about the positives and how these great findings they had revolutionized the area of science, versus another one where they talked about all of the failed experiments along the way, everything that went wrong, how many years it took to get there, the knockbacks, the grants that didn't get funded. And actually what they found was that the high school students were more engaged and wanted to learn more about the ones who had failed rather than the ones who were an absolute success, because they could absolutely see the journey from here to here rather than I was here and then I got to there straight away. So by making that journey more accessible, it does help the students. And I use a cyclical improvements approach. So I design something, I then apply this, I reflect on it, and then I redesign. And I try to do this when I'm preparing academic work, but I also try to encourage my students to do it as well. So when they're designing an experiment, for example, what is the outcome? What are they hoping to achieve? How are they going to own that? What do they need to do along the way? They then would complete that assignment or set of work, test their hypothesis, and then reflect on what happened. So I do this in a module BMS 2013, which I will come on to shortly. They look at the context and they analyse those results. They then have a think about how they would do that again. So we allow them a second attempt and they can modify things again. So this is version 2.0 for this cycle. And I'm very keen on using storytelling and empathy. So I will go off on tangents when I'm doing a lecture. I think it keeps the students engaged. If you can give them real life vignettes in there, then that does help to enliven what you're teaching. But you have to position the students. You have to give them that reason why. So bringing that hook back in as well to show them this is what happened, this is how we learned from it, and this is how we've moved on. One of the things I'm very keen on is to have the engagement and the empathy that's involved. So thinking again about failure, it puts us in a vulnerable position. I encourage students to think about beta testing. So if I can bring in anything from other areas into my knowledge and understanding. So for example, a lot of our students are interested in coding. You make a slip up in your code and things are going to go wrong. So you have to take those steps back in the process to appreciate where things have gone wrong and why before you can apply that. So applying that context to other areas of their learning helps them to develop. And I encourage them to take deep dives into their understanding as well. So if we think about didactic learning, we know that it doesn't work. The sheer volume of taking things in during a lecture is way too much. And when students think about catching up, they think about watching the recorded lecture again and thinking that that may be enough. So what I'm trying to do is get them to take that deep dive into the information, to really question things and to stop and think, well, why is that? I don't understand that, so I need to be addressing this. So in a lecture, when I do have to give lectures, I will encourage students to not write down what they understand, but only to write down what they don't understand, because that's where I want them to learn. That's where I want them to really go back to afterwards. And then afterwards to develop that curiosity as well. So using the feedback they've got, addressing this and emphasising the goals. And I'm a massive fan of Lego, so I love to use what we call rapid ideation. So this is fail fast, fail early, and try again. So this was a sustainability in science activity called an enterprise challenge, where we had lots of teams of students and we just gave them some Lego. They had pens, pencils, they could do what they wanted, but they had to produce something which was an illustration of what they were designing. And we had a robot for cleaning up spills versus and we also had an alternative biodegradable set of gloves that students were thinking about. Encouraging this play removes rigidity and it also stimulates creativity, and the divergent thinking that is involved, coming up with lots of ideas, gives you the what ifs. We then move from that divergent thinking back down through our convergent thinking, always putting students at the centre, so heterogogic learning. And remembering that you can't teach life experience. If we could bless our students with hindsight, that would be amazing. And they would know that they should attend their 9 o'clocks and they should attend their seminars. Unfortunately, us sitting there saying that doesn't always work. We have to let them make those mistakes and find that out for themselves. And ultimately, they're becoming scientists. So they're transitioning from stage 1, where we have this surface knowledge, and then we're moving them through to owning that information and owning their direction, that personal data, even if it can be a messy process along the way. But getting them to reflect on where they've been and how they got there in the first place is really useful. And encourage them to share this with their peers. Getting that sense of community in stage 1 is so important. I see lots of groups of students who will gravitate to certain areas of lecture theatres or certain parts of the seminar rooms. The time that they arrive determines who they're going to be sat with or where they choose to be in that community. So really trying to understand what's happening with your students has been really helpful for me. I also try to produce an online community as well, recognising that not all students want to engage in person or don't feel comfortable speaking up, but they're more than happy to do this online. So I do try to provide an online community where possible. And I've noticed one of my colleagues from Malaysia is on the call today. So hello, Pam. This is a module that is run in Newcastle and also at our NUMED Malaysia campus. So it's called Practical and Presentation Skills. And the reason that I've put carrots on there is that we use a carrot approach in this module. So very early on in this module, we set an essay task for the students. And the topic is something which is going to be relevant to later on in their studies. It's a formative essay. They self-police writing it. We then go online and we give a feedback session as to what we were expecting, things they might want to include, and we encourage the students to self-mark and peer mark if they're willing to. What it means is that the research that they're doing here can be applied all the way over here, and that's really beneficial. We then have a practical one, and we don't assess this at all, but what we do is encourage the students to look back at what they did in stage one, and they decide from that what part of a lab report that they need to practice on, what didn't go well, where they would like to improve. The second lab is then assessed at 70%, and this is a full lab report. We've then got a third lab, which again is non-assessed. This allows them experience of doing data analysis, calculations, really working on their experimental technique. And then the last one is an oral presentation, and this is assessed, but also uses some of the research they've had previously. And what have I found from this process? So what I noticed was that in the BMS 2013 module, we saw lots more community problem solving. I set up a discussion board online via our Canvas site, and lots of students engaged in this. So I had over 150 comments in total last year. What it did reduce was the number of direct emails to me and the number of students turning up at the door to ask questions, because we saw community problem solving. If I hadn't responded within a certain amount of time, the chances were another student would respond instead. What I did observe, though, in the assignments was that there was some groupthink. There was some wording that I started to see appearing over and over again. So wording like triple graph, which I'd never used, but suddenly started appearing in a few of them. So that suggested to me that there was communities of learning, but possibly some groupthink taking place. I did see some varying attendance at optional support sessions. So this varied, especially with the fully formative lab report. There was good engagement with the rubric and the feedback comments, though. So this was really positive for me. We're very keen on making sure that students fully understand where they achieved those marks. This is flipping it on the head of the way that students view marks. They see that they have lost marks in sections, whereas actually we need to encourage them to think you've earned marks in sections rather than you starting at 100 and us knocking marks off. You start at 0 and we build that up. And these were some nice comments that students had responded in previous years based on the feedback. So I'm keen to provide a space for students to fail and learn, and I take leanings a lot of the time from Enterprise Educators UK. Do check if your institution is a member of EE UK, because they're a great institution to be a part of. They can provide lots of support. There's loads of learning resources on there. And Alan Gibb was one of the founders of EE UK, and he had a lovely paper which basically said creating conducive environments for learning and entrepreneurship, living with, dealing with, creating and enjoying uncertainty and complexity. And I've just taken entrepreneurship out because I think we can apply that to any area. So it doesn't have to be the domain of entrepreneurship. We need to be setting students up to cope with uncertainty and to cope with things going wrong. And this is their behaviour, their capacity to practice and their capacity to create and enjoy. And I was fascinated by Hannah's little Lego person with the cut-throughs and showing the anatomy, because I absolutely agree with that. So if I'm trying to explain cell biology to a student, having a two-dimensional image just doesn't work. You have to really be thinking about how messy that cell is, and that life isn't straightforward, that it is complicated, and we need to see how things fit together. And I try and take inspiration from lots of different areas as well. So this is some graffiti artwork behind the Glass House, which is our opera house here in Newcastle. And I just really like this quote, and I use it on the front page of my Canvas module by Gil Scott-Heron, who is an American jazz poet. So I have managed to publish on this. This is just one of the images that I've taken from Watts & Hetherington 2024 that we recently published. And what I did was ask students at the start of my enterprise module, what do you hope to get? What skills do you hope to gain, or what do you hope to get by the end of this module? Why are you here? And it was very, very bold. This confidence came out as being the biggest thing that undergraduates wanted to get. Conversely, on the postgraduate side, it was quite interesting. Students seemed to be very much focused on the skills. And I'm here for a reason. I'm here just to do this. And it became less about the ideas and the creativity. There were some people thinking about money. The funniest one I think I saw was crypto bros, was something that one of our undergraduates came up with. The demographics are very different, obviously. On the undergraduate module, we have about 60 students a year. On the postgraduate module, there's about 20, of which half of those are intercalating medical students. So we've got very different cohorts that are involved here. One of the things that we do very early on, though, is get students to think about themselves. So where do I fit in life? How am I going to develop? So I encourage students on the enterprise module to do what's called a get-to test. And this is a self-test of entrepreneurship and enterprise capacity. And it gives you a general score and an overall descriptor. Students are coming onto my business enterprise module not having any business background, and also being quite concerned and worried that they don't know enough. So I have to very early on help them find their sense of self. And I have a think about Maslow's hierarchy. When we're starting out with this, we've got a very diverse cohort of learners, and we need to get them from coming in and feeling physiologically safe to then having self-actualization and knowing their place in the world and where they want to go. These are students in stage 3. They're about to leave university, go off and do new things. So we need to have them prepared to understand what they want to do in the future. And I was thinking, actually, I should have put this upside down so that actually Covey's 7 habits of highly effective people, if we flip those upside down, being active and not reactive fits with biological and physiological safety. Having your end goal up front gives you that reassurance and safety that you know where you're going, and so on until we get to number 7, self-efficacy and development, which fits again with self-actualization. So what I try to do through the business enterprise module is develop that student's sense of self. I'm not trying to make entrepreneurs. I'm just trying to help them to understand where they want to go and find that passion through their lived experience. And this is a little activity that you can use as a takeaway. I thought it was great that Hannah had her little name cards. I think that's fabulous. We do the same with students in the laboratory so that they know where they can, who they're working with. This is a little activity where you introduce yourself like James Bond. So my name is Carys. I'm Carys Watts. I'm at Newcastle University, and I'm a bioscience educator educating brilliant bioscience minds. When I am not running around after my children, I enjoy running around in the countryside. So you're sharing a little bit of everything. But the important thing is that you say your name and then you repeat your name, because we forget the first piece of information that somebody tells us, and that helps it to stick. And I just do this with my students in the very first 5-10 minutes of our first session where they're in groups together. And it stops it being this situation of somebody being unsure about the commodities or the people they're working with, also worrying that they're going to just spout things out. They're very self-conscious. They also don't know what's coming. So it's the uncertainty. I encourage students to think about their unconscious bias and their preference and in-grouping, and also the value that everybody is bringing to that group as well. So thinking about students that are studying in a second language, that's incredible. Their brains are so much more tapped in to looking for opportunities because they see things slightly differently. And this is the process I go through during my module. So building on this curiosity, embedding this, enacting this through the activities that we're doing, and then committing this. So really committing to do that presentation at the end. And if students understand that we're going on a journey, then they're more willing to take part. But this is what it truly looks like, very non-linear. So I use a cyclical theory case study activity approach, and this involves team working and inquiry, with a goal being that they're all going to come up with these amazing innovative ideas that are going to change the world. In reality, that doesn't necessarily happen. What I've noticed from our publication that we had this year, which was a 10-year longitudinal study of where our graduates have gone, is that it normally takes about 5 to 7 years post-graduation before we see students becoming entrepreneurs or embarking on that journey or taking a pivot in their career, but they need to build that lived experience first, and without that we're not preparing them to find those opportunities. So yes, it is a Marmite module, but these are some of the ultimate successes that have come about through failure. So we've got David here on the left. This was at a team building day that we had, and this was a 5-meter platform, and he was the only one that managed to leap with no fear to hit this giant red ball. He's now on his 3rd and 4th spin out. And then over here, this is Alex. I was fortunate enough to buy some cookies for the students this year. Thank you to the Bioscience Teacher of the Year award. That's helped to pay for the cookies for the students, so that we could do some market research actually live in the lecture. And I'm pleased to say that Alex's cookies have just launched in Tesco literally this week. So very, very proud of him. The reason that I show this though is that on his first expo, he managed to step backwards through his screen and destroy this. So he learned a very big fail, and he's very open about his things that have gone wrong in the past. And we're seeing this happening more at postgraduate level as well. So this is just some of the things I've pulled from at Newcastle. There is a project called Failing Forward, and this looks at postgraduate researchers and how things are developing, and that things don't always work according to plan. And why is it important, and what do our employers think? So this is all unpublished observations over the last 12 months from talking to people that are involved with my module or that I know externally. Some of the things that they said students need to develop more. So the capacity to reflect, compartmentalization of knowledge, being underprepared for interviews. So for example, they haven't done that deep dive into understanding where they're going and the tasks that they need to achieve to get through interview, for example. And these last two, a little bit controversial here, but these are comments that I've had from employers that have said when they've had people at interviews, the confidence tends to be with the males, but actually the extra knowledge that's required isn't necessarily there. And females that have come to interview tend to be more hesitant, or may be not confident in putting forward proposals when actually they understand it fully. They just haven't got that confidence there. So that's really interesting from that perspective of building on that confidence through their studies as well. And we as academics, we sit in an unusual position. So HE is a champion of knowledge, but we also have this unusual role as being a mentor or developer of these life skills. So we're helping to shape these individuals to go out into the wider world. And it is a very unusual environment to be in. So providing a progressive transition from further education to higher education can help to keep these students more afloat. Recognising that spoon feeding does not build capacity or ability in students, but allowing them to be able to feed themselves, whether it's trying berries, they need to learn and understand and try that for themselves and know what failure feels like. And one of the things that I've noticed as well is that there tends to be this oversharing, this blurring of boundaries, especially which comes with social media and digital environments as well. So we need to somehow reset these expectations with the students. So I provide an opportunity for students to fail safely and take calculated risks, not all out risks, to actually weigh things up along the way, but to trust us, to trust experience and perspective, and to trust each other. Giving them the tools and abilities to be able to see that pivoting or changing your mind or redesigning something is not failure. It's a scientific process that can develop that confidence. And we are preparing them for an uncertain world. So things are in flux with artificial intelligence, with the economy, with how things are changing in the world. So preparing them for that life isn't going to be linear is probably one of the best things that we can do. So I believe that we should trust in the learning process and be comfortable at not getting it right first time. Certainly I apply that same approach with every time I develop something new for teaching. Does it work? Reflect on it, change it. And I really like the idea that Hannah had of checking halfway through the module. How are things going? Do we have time to change things before the end? That's certainly something that we're looking at here in Newcastle as well. And having this cyclical approach to allow that students to grow and see failure as a tool to grow. And by helping others develop, you also see your own worth as well. And this is just a quote from the paper that was published in September, I think it was. And I've highlighted in red the things I think are really key. So with no model answer, the journey is the learning and not whether the concept will work. Positioning the ideation within a recognised discipline and awakening the active growth mindset. I think those are the key things that I've noticed from looking back over our graduates. So in summary, I believe that increased engagement with formative work does help our students. Seeing the benefits of looking back on their feedback, really engaging with that and seeing it as a learning process rather than a failure. Having that creative ideation in there, encouraging them to play and have fun with what they're doing will encourage them to be more involved in it. And having that confidence to question others and self. Focusing not on how fast you're going to get there, but actually the journey that you're on. And appreciating that non-linear process and that it is a very scientific process. And that value you will only recognise retrospectively. So I've lost count of the number of times students have said, I use what you taught me now, but it normally tends to be in a lived experience context down the line. They don't necessarily see the benefit of it at the time, a bit like eating your vegetables. You know it's good for you, and you know you should, but you might not necessarily want to. And that's it from me. Apologies, I've overrun. I hope that was okay. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Carys. Another wonderful talk. We've had so much engagement in the chat. I've completely lost track. So I'm hoping
sorry.
managed to actually pull out some questions for that for Carys.
Well, that's literally my job. Carys, amazing. Thank you very much. There was a couple of questions, but there was a long conversation going on that Naya began with her comment about international students. Now, I've summarised the chat, and I think I've got it down to into a single thing. And so, bear with me; it's on a different screen. So Naya's discussion highlights trends among students, particularly international ones, where engagement in non-assessed activities is declining. And this has led universities to increasingly assess more activities, creating a cycle where students focus only on graded work. The pandemic may have exacerbated this issue. To address this engagement, some students implement formative assessments that mirror summative ones, or establishing rules that link formative activity to completion of the highest courses. So that whole discourse was get the formative buy-in, getting people into that situation to fail, and the challenges of doing that with students who are so set on success as the only metric that matters.
Yeah.
So in Great Impossible Questions, go with that one, please.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I perceive it is students are scared, basically, at the end of the day. They're scared of failure. they are in an environment where they've had to work really hard to get to where they are, which is, congratulations, brilliant. But then we've just shifted the goalposts and we've said, oh, that's worked for you so far. Now we're gonna give you these big hour-long sessions. We're gonna give you loads of extra resources. We're gonna treat you in a very different way, and crack on, do it. That's hard. That's really hard. And that's why we normally see 4 to 6 weeks into the first term of university, the wobbles start happening. They're very scared. So for me, it's about providing that environment for them to be able to talk to each other, to actually say, am I doing the right thing? Does this work? And putting them in positions where there's no risk to do this. So giving them formative tasks early on. One of the external things that happened at Newcastle was that back in 2018, we were delivered a task of reducing the number of assessments. So we had an assessment tariff, limited number that we could do. We could still have formative in there. And yes, we did see students declining the offers of formative. By giving them that carrot and saying, if you do this, it will help you later on, that forced them more to think, oh, well, I've got to do the work anyway, so I'll get some benefit from doing this. But actually getting them to swap that work with their peers did really help. Absolutely, I appreciate the comments about international students, and culture is huge with this. The culture of it has to be perfect. That's, yeah, absolutely. Or working on your English, but getting students into that environment of working together and diversifying those groups is so important. So I'm very strict on my groups when it gets into stage 3, and I will look at the overall demographic, and I will deliberately put students into groups to build that diversity, and we grow those groups. And the first 2 hours of my module isn't about what the module is going to be about. It's about growing that team and that understanding and actually learning about other people. And when you see a UK home student realize, oh wow, they can speak 3 different languages, how much capacity have they got? And I'm going, that is a superpower you've got there. That's incredible. Learn from that. Think about, how much they've had to work to get here. And it really does make students up their game and think, yeah, actually, that is really impressive. And by having that understanding, it brings them more kind of into the fold of learning to say, this is our environment. We're all learning here and we can all learn from each other. So I don't know if that's answered it. Nia, was that anywhere near?
Yeah, my issue is that I work at Newcastle. You're probably aware of Into Newcastle, so I work for the Manchester version of Into Manchester. So we're all international students, and unlike Newcastle, we're not campus based, so we're a standalone centre. So it's very difficult to diversify the groups, especially because we have, although they're from different countries, they're from common language backgrounds. So, for example, Middle Eastern students, they're from all different places, but they speak Arabic as a common language. So many of them are sponsored as well, so they're under immense pressure, like external pressures to succeed, and they don't really understand the purpose, and it's very difficult in the constrained time that we've got with them to do these kind of iterative things, because you say 4 to 6 weeks in, they realise, but 4 to 6 weeks in, we're about to examine them about 3 or 4 weeks later again after that. So it's really, really difficult to have enough time. But time is not our friend.
I would say probably if I was going to approach that, I would encourage submission and then anonymity and then selective redistribution. So making sure that you're giving out different scripts to people and to then think, okay, if I was feeding back to myself, how would I want to hear this? What do I understand from this? Oh, that was really interesting, and that's a different perspective. So getting them to really think about supporting each other, but their own learning through engaging with that feedback process. I think that's probably the only carrot I could offer for that. Hope that helps.
We're very keen for our students to learn from failure. That's what we're trying to do, is just how to make it fit with our context. But very, very interesting today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. We had 2 other questions in there. There was a lot of talk about Rocky's question. Now, if Rocky's still in the room, I'm trying a new tactic out. I'm trying to find the person who's posed the question and get them to then say the question. Rocky, are you happy to do your question?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic.
Wonder if everyone can hear. So, I think it was the question came about when I was hearing about the 3-stage step-up coaching approach. And I think there's been quite a lot of sort of replies to the question. But the question was basically, what's your take on students who are extremely anxious and are typically reluctant to give presentations, no matter what audience they are faced with, and taking into account how adjustments, alternative arrangements are very common nowadays. So they might feel like they've actually got something else that they can fall back on, and potentially not going to again engage as much with that coaching aspect. So that was the questions, and you could probably then follow the thread.
Yeah, absolutely. So students aren't homogenous. They're a great mix, and there will always be students who do have crippling anxiety and do not want to be in a position where they're putting themselves out there to talk. It's the most terrifying thing for them, and I didn't want to force students into that position. We used to have group pitches where they would all come up to the front and they would all deliver a little bit, but what I was finding was that they would forget, and they would come up to me afterwards going, "Oh, I meant to say this, but I didn't say that." And I thought, well, that's what I wanted to hear. So why am I forcing you to stand up there and put yourself in the headlights when actually you're going to learn a lot more, and you're going to practice more by re-recording things and practicing together and doing your bits and pausing the recording and thinking, do I want to do that again? And because they're all doing it together, this does help them. And they don't even have to be in the same room doing it. They can edit the videos together afterwards. That's absolutely fine. So you're never going to create a one-size-fits-all approach with presentations. Yes, we still do it for the final year projects. If students are very anxious, they get to do that in a room just with the assessor, which is absolutely fine. It's hard. It is hard, but it is a life skill that we are developing. So if we think about assessment centres now, we are seeing more and more that are using video interviews, for example. So by being able to be armed with that virtual business card, to be able to walk in and know that they can say 3 interesting things very early on, and once they've got that out the way, they can then take that deep breath and go, okay, I've done it now. They've got that rehearsal, they've got it done. It allows them to then engage in networking events, different things. They've got that point of contact that they can ask someone about. So I use this technique all the time. So there's people who I go and, how's your dog? How's things out at the beach? There's things I will always remember, little bits about those people. And it's the same principle as when we used to have business cards and used to scribble on the back of a business card. It's exactly the same process. So it's just initially building that little bit of confidence to be able to talk about yourselves. So I hope that helps.
Excellent. Carys, we've got one last question, but we'll do this really quickly because we are about to run out of time. But Melanie is a further education teacher, and she was wondering about preparing the students to transition into this area to start the failure. So, word from the wise, please.
Smile would be my key thing. Is that when I showed that image of the big person and the small person, I think every student coming into higher education feels like the small person, and that everybody else is terrifying or deserves to be here and that they don't. That's certain imposter syndrome. Whereas actually what I'm doing is flipping the narrative and saying everyone is scared. It's just that some people show it and others don't. That's the difference. So at the end of the day, if you smile and say hello to someone, they may just grunt back at you. They may be having a bad day, or you may just find your best friend for life. So just starting to meet people, I suppose.
Smile and be nice.
Yeah.
What a great way to end